What's going on, everybody? Ryan Thomas here live on the Thomas Take Sports podcast. Once again, another Thomas Take Sports podcast Wednesday, where I am joined by a guest, Mr. Matt Parrino. What's going on, buddy?
Ryan, thanks for having me on the show, man. It's funny. We go way back to my UFC days when coming through Buffalo, I got to meet you a few times, and now I'm covering the Bills, and I know we've been waiting to connect, and it's fun to get on your show.
Yeah, it's a small world how everything kind of worked out for those of the listeners and viewers that don't know. You know, you mentioned we go back a little bit. We talked at the UFC Open Workouts when it was UFC 210 in Buffalo, and you were out in Vegas, you know, working for the UFC as their digital media, you know, for the site and doing the rankings report with Forrest Griffin. Talk about that a little bit. Talk about your career journey thus far and what led you back to Buffalo.
Yeah, man. So I happened on that job by chance. I was working at the Tonawanda News here in Western New York, right out of school at the University of Buffalo, and covering, high school sports. And that job kind of came up out of nowhere. They really liked kind of some of the things that I could bring to that role. Some of the ideas I had. One of them you mentioned was the rankings report. And when I was going out there for the job, I hadn't even met Forrest yet. I didn't know his availability. He wasn't even really part of that vision. And then when I got out there, it's almost like all these little things started happening, and we really took the website to new heights, and it's continued that development and growth since I've left. They launched a complete reboot of UFC.com since I left, and the guys there and gals that are still there running it, doing a great job. But it was an opportunity to go out and cover professional sports. That was my end goal growing up. I was enamored with the NFL and the NBA growing up, and then as I got older and was introduced to MMA, really became interested in that sport as well. And when I had the opportunity to go out there and work with the likes of Dana White and cover this sport, it was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. Went out there, and it was everything I could have hoped for. It really allowed me a peek behind the scenes at not only how professional sports work, but also gave me unbelievable access to professional athletes on a daily basis that really helped me grow as a journalist from the perspective of building relationships with people and learning how to talk to people. And I think that was a really critical part of my journey, and that led me back to Buffalo. Now I'm covering the Buffalo Bills full time for NYUp.com and Syracuse.com, the advanced media group in Syracuse, and it's been everything I hoped for, and getting ready, geared up for the off season, then into my second full season covering the Bills.
That had to be a heck of a journey to go from Buffalo to Vegas on the wild journey that the UFC has had, especially the last, I'd say, 10 years. Especially, it seems like the last 10 years the sport's grown immensely, and that had to be a real roller coaster ride to do the traveling and to go event to event and work with guys like Dana White. If I could ask you, what was that experience like? Because from the fan perspective, they see Dana White as a really bombastic personality, but from everybody that I've talked to, working with him is phenomenal.
He's somebody that enables everybody that works at that company to be great in whatever they do. And, I will tell people all the time about Dana, there's this dynamic that he brings the best and the brightest to Las Vegas to help build the UFC. But at the same time, it's this weird thing going on there because the UFC is his baby. It's his creation. He dreamed it into reality. So he's very particular about how it's run and how it's operated. And you see it, in every area of the business. But listen, MMA, the sport of MMA wouldn't be possible without Dana White. I mean, if you don't have that respect for him just at that baseline level, you're just not understanding everything that happened. I mean, you look at a guy that I respect a ton, a journalist, and Ariel Helwani. Mm-hmm. As much as he's had problems with Dana, he'll always maintain in everything he says, giving the credit to Dana for how the sport has been built and how it's been grown. Now, he has a lot of issues with him, and that's neither here nor there. But, even some people that clash with Dana will go ahead and tell you, what he's meant to the sport. But, as far as me personally, it was an unbelievable experience, like getting to, like you said, travel and get to be up close and personal for all these fights. I tell people all the time, one of my first trips that I traveled to cover was the UFC in Boston. It was Conor McGregor versus Dennis Seaver, and that was right before the real blow up of Conor, right? That was, he had a couple fights, he had come back, they had the big thing in Dublin when the arena exploded, when he beat Diego Brandao, and everything was crazy, starting to build, but he wasn't at the height of pop culture yet that obviously he's at today, and even, as he ascended to the Aldo fight. But I remember that whole week being behind the scenes, getting to go with him to Peter Welch's gym and watch some of his private workouts, and just seeing the determination and the attitude and the self-belief. I mean, that was at a time when Conor, and he probably still does this today, he would take around this little notebook and he'd be writing down his thoughts, whether it be about his opponent, what he was going to do at the press conference, what he was going to do at the fight. There's not many people in sports that have the kind of attention to detail that Conor McGregor has, and everything that he's seen. Even today I saw something. He put something out about looking back at the 3 years.
Right, about the Nate Diaz exchange.
The Nate Diaz fight.
Yeah.
He's amazing at framing things, right? The way that he's able to frame everything, no matter what it is, whether it's a win, whether it's a loss, whether it's something that makes him look good or something that makes him look bad, he is a master at framing things to have it have the best
outcome, even of a bad situation.
Like, it makes everything look good, and he studies everything. He studied this game, and he's come out of it as the icon of all icons. I mean, you look back at this, and he changed the game. Ronda Rousey changed the game in her own way. Randy Couture in his day changed the game in his own way. Brock Lesnar. There's been a bunch of pioneers, but no single person has done. I mean, he's the Michael Jordan or Muhammad Ali of this sport. I mean, he's taken it to the mainstream. I'm not necessarily sure that ESPN ever comes calling the way they did without Conor McGregor.
I would completely 100% agree with everything you said. And it's amazing because you really started to see. We always talk about, like in fighting too, we always talk about, there's the Russian versus the American, or there's the Brazilian versus the American. I've never seen or witnessed a country rally around a fighter, whether it be in boxing or MMA, like the way Ireland supports Conor McGregor. And I think that's really what was the launching pad, if you will, for his career, was the fact that he had thousands upon thousands of Irish fans, whether they were from Ireland or from here or any other place around the world. They just really support him, and when he wins or loses, they're still there. That is really rare to find in any sport, let alone fighting.
Vegas, when Conor McGregor fought in Vegas, it turned into Ireland, the American version of Ireland. The streets were flooded with Irish flags. You would go to the MGM Grand Convention Center for the weigh-ins, and they have like 6 or 7 stories of escalators. And as you would come down the escalators, I remember this when he fought Dustin Poirier at 178, and then Chad Mendes at 189, Jose Aldo as well. When you're coming down the escalators at the MGM, they fight at T-Mobile now, but when they were doing it there, you literally saw this crazed group of Irish people just chanting his name and singing songs that they made up about him. You're right. You're right on the money. There's been nobody that's galvanized their country in fighting. I mean, Jose Aldo is a legend in Brazil. I mean, when you talk about, there's a reverence there for Jose Aldo in Brazil that's unlike a lot of people. Same thing with Anderson Silva. But the connection between McGregor and the Irish fan base, and the way that it's kind of an interchangeable dynamic, the way that he gives back to them as well, it's awesome.
My biggest takeaway from that is that, my time when I actually went on the Floyd Mayweather McGregor press tour, I went to Toronto and was in like this weird kind of corridor where they had the fighters walk through, and I thought, well, I'm hoping, I don't dislike Floyd, but I'm far more of a Conor fan. I'm more of an MMA fan than I've ever been a boxing fan, a big boxing fan as well. But I was hoping, praying that Conor would walk through there, and sure enough, as I'm kind of standing there, kind of waiting for people to walk through, it was about 15, 20 minutes. I'm kind of standing next to one of my other colleagues, and Conor walks right past me. And the moment he entered the room, you couldn't hear a pin drop. I mean, it was ridiculous. The aura around that guy is unlike. I get chills just thinking about it. Literally from arm's length, the guy was right in front of me. So that was a really cool experience, one that I'll never forget. And that fight was phenomenal. To be honest, that fight was unreal for that time.
The Floyd fight?
Yeah, the Floyd Mayweather-McGregor fight. I mean, watching it play itself out, I had to pinch myself and be like, this is really happening. This is real. Yeah. This is actually a real thing.
Yeah, it's funny. I had mixed emotions about it. We really covered it pretty hard once Dana and, the UFC got on board and helped co-promote it. But, I always just thought it was cool because it brought MMA to the mainstream like nothing else really could. But at the same time, it was, as an MMA purist, I mean, I watched boxing growing up. My dad and my uncle, we'd always get all the big fights from Lennox Lewis and Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield. But what you talk about, like, my real passion, and MMA is my passion. And I just always thought, it was almost like we were playing second fiddle to boxing by doing that.
Right.
In hindsight, I didn't love it because why I didn't love it? Because I knew it was never going to be paid back. You know what I mean? Conor was expected to go to his game and play that, but it was never going to come back to the MMA side, which it can't. Let's be honest.
Right.
Conor McGregor would absolutely
destroy
ruin Floyd Mayweather in a real fight. So it's not something that I'd even want to see or pay to watch. But the point of it was, I just thought that Conor was bigger than that. I never thought that Conor needed that. But at the same time, you're right. It was quite the spectacle. I remember being there on the night and the anticipation for it, because what do people love? It's like, I think it's kind of like, it's the interest in the unknown, like not knowing what's going to happen was something that was super interesting. So, it was quite the spectacle. I will agree with you there.
Yeah, and I mean, I thought he fought fairly well, and maybe he might not ever win a UFC title again. The jury is out on that. Only time will tell. But in terms of his fighting legacy, I think more than winning the featherweight title over Jose Aldo in 13 seconds, more than becoming the first quote-unquote champ of the UFC, the simultaneous champ of lightweight and featherweight, beating Eddie Alvarez in Madison Square Garden, I think his biggest legacy is going into another arena, going into another sport in boxing, and lasting 10 rounds with Floyd. Albeit Floyd, a little bit older now, I did not think that would happen. I didn't think Conor would do that well. Moral victories do exist in this case, right?
Yeah, so I do think that, he has always dared to do whatever it is that people say he can't do. You know what I mean? I think that for a long time, during the come up, when he was chasing the 145-pound title, there were so many questions about, could he go to 155 and be successful? And I think like Conor is this weird dynamic where people kind of downplay everything that he's done for whatever reason, he never fought Frankie Edgar, and that was just, held over his head for years and years. And even when he beat Eddie Alvarez, people were like, well, he never fought Frankie Edgar. I'm like, Eddie Alvarez is a more dangerous version of Frankie Edgar. I mean, that guy is a wrestler, probably a better striker with more finishes on the feet. I never really understood that process. To take out Jose Aldo, who at the time was the premier guy, I see what you're saying. I just, I don't know. I still have weird feelings about the whole boxing thing.
Right.
To me, it never felt like it needed to be done. But at the same time, you're right. It was this huge thing, and he went. And also, I wonder also how much Floyd carried him early in that fight,
right?
And wanted to take him. I don't know. It just the whole thing felt a little weird to me. I don't know.
I think I know I felt the same way. I get the Facebook lookbacks all the time, in August or July, during the summertime when there was chatter. One of the first articles I ever wrote for one of the first sites I wrote for that covered boxing. I said that it was the ultimate fighting circus, and that it was the fight was a farce. And I really, in a lot of ways, it was a farce. There was a lot of hokey promotion behind it, but as it kind of, came close to it actually happening, I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. I mean, I thought that physically he got himself in probably the best shape of his life for that fight. And the process was pretty interesting, but nonetheless, I'm hoping that he can get back on the horse and get back in the win column after that Habib fight.
Yeah, I anticipate that, he will plan his next fight, out pretty well. He'll zero in on somebody. I think, Cowboy's a great matchup for him. I think that, if his team, if he and his team are able to study him quite a bit, I would like to see that Khabib rematch at some point.
Right.
I think that he'd do a lot better in the rematch. I think he understood what he would have done differently after. That's one thing that Conor doesn't get enough credit for, is his ability to study his opponents and study going into a fight. I thought that he admitted that he made an error in how he prepared for that fight, and he went into it with too much of a defensive mindset. And I thought that without even hearing him say that.
Right, I did too.
In the first couple of rounds, he was very tentative with his approach on the feet, and that's not him. He comes out, and he goes right after you, and I think he was afraid of the takedown. So, I definitely don't think that the Conor McGregor story is over by any stretch. I mentioned I remember you saying earlier, you don't know if he'll ever get another title. I think he will get another title. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know what weight class it'll be at. I definitely want to see him. I think Max Holloway can beat Dustin Poirier, and I think Max Holloway is the worst matchup for
Habib. Me too.
Yes. and then if you're thinking about what's next, if Max Holloway is able to kind of run that gauntlet, and Conor comes back and takes on a Cowboy Cerrone or somebody else, and a name out there.
Yeah, you never know what could happen.
That rematch, and I want to see that rematch.
Right, you never know. I mean, I'm just saying it from a perspective of right now he doesn't have a title. Who knows if he'll get one back? I lean towards the fact that he will, just because he's had the mental fortitude to do what he's done so far, and he's done a lot. So it's gonna be very interesting. There was another MMA headline that I wanted to bring up before we get into the Buffalo Bills talk. The fighter that really piqued my interest in MMA. There's quite a few, obviously. It's one of those sports where you can start watching it and you can kind of gravitate to certain fighters. But the one fighter that really grasped my attention back in the day, mid-2000s, early 2000s, was George St. Pierre. He just announced his retirement. He's out of the USADA testing pool, so if he were to, quote-unquote, come back again, he would have to be put back into the USADA testing pool, and he'd have to wait 6 months in order to return. What is your take on the career of George St. Pierre? Where do you see him among the all-time greats in the sport of mixed martial arts?
It's funny. I've been so Bills heavy. That's something I probably would want to take some time to really think about.
Right.
But off the cuff, I mean, to me, he's definitely top 4. Right. He's on the Mount Rushmore right now. I mean, I put John Jones there. I put Anderson Silva there. And honestly, I put Conor there. I know it would probably be a controversial thing, but the first ever champion. You think about that and put it in context. The Jose Aldo win is one of the most overlooked things in the history of MMA. The guy went in after a year and a half when nobody ever came close to beating Jose Aldo, and he took him out in 13 seconds. That on its own is Mount Rushmore-esque type of win.
Right.
And then you combo that with he comes back and takes out Eddie Alvarez, the guy that, until he absolutely embarrassed him, was the worst possible matchup for Conor. I remember that those 2 weeks leading up to the fight.
Everyone was picking Eddie.
Everybody was picking Eddie. They said this was the worst matchup. They said Conor was going to be on his back in the first minute, and he was going to get beaten up. He never got taken down in that fight. So just those two performances alone. And then I put George St. Pierre there. I mean, George St. Pierre's career is just phenomenal. For him to accomplish what he accomplished in his day, the run that he went on, all of the title defenses, all of the big names that he beat. I mean, Matt Hughes, Carlos Condit, Nick Diaz, you could go up and down his resume, and it's just unreal. And then to come back and go up there and take out Michael Bisping. Now, let me be honest, he was definitely cherry-picking that fight a little bit.
Right.
It was a very nice cozy matchup against a guy in Bisping who didn't offer a ton of threatening knockout power outside of his performance against Luke Rockhold. I think GSP knew it. They trained together back in the day. He knew he was going to be in that fight. But you just take the accolades and the titles and just overall what he meant to this sport and what he meant to Canada. You talk about what Conor meant to Ireland. George St. Pierre is right there in terms of what he meant to Canada and what he did for Canadian MMA. And I think his spot in this sport is forever forged, and one heck of a career.
There was a really interesting award that George St. Pierre won during his time in the heyday of the UFC. Back 2010, it was the Winter Olympics, and Sidney Crosby scored that game-winning goal on Ryan Miller. Sorry, Sabres fans, I hate to jog that back in your memory, but Sidney Crosby scores that game-winning goal. Canada gets the gold wrapped around their necks, the gold medal, and they did the Athlete of the Year. Who's the Athlete of the Year? And George St. Pierre won it that year. Sidney Crosby did not. So if that doesn't tell you how big of a star George St. Pierre was in Canada, I don't know what will.
For sure, man.
Well, let's head into Buffalo Bills talk. You are basically just on the off-season tour right now. You just got back from Indianapolis at the NFL Scouting Combine, right? What was that like?
It was a great experience, getting the chance to see, the entire NFL world converge for a week there was definitely some interesting, an interesting week. I think that getting a chance to talk to all of these potential prospects and dig in a little bit deeper is interesting. I put out a story today on NY Up about 18 offensive players from the combine that said something that just sparked a little something in me. In terms of thinking to what Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane have said about what they're looking for, in the draft, in college prospects, and there's so much that I think you can learn from those little tidbits. And you look at a guy like Dalton Risner from Kansas State. He's a right tackle that is also a beast who's also projecting to have some versatility moving into the inside, and everything that comes out of this kid's mouth screams the process. Team guy, close friends with Harrison Phillips, another process guy. Everything that he does, he wants to earn. Just little buzzwords that seems like he's already been in the locker room with Sean McDermott. I think that this organization and this coaching staff and front office are really going to be smitten with Dalton Risner when it comes to the draft.
I want to say this too, and not just because you're a good buddy of mine through the Bills media, and because you're on the show and everything like that. You took the time out of your day to come on, which I really appreciate. But I can't thank you enough for covering the Buffalo Bills with the best of your ability. It frustrates me more than anything to see the national media and somewhat see how they cover this team and just kind of how out of the loop they are. Where with gentlemen like yourself, with a gentleman like Ryan Talbot at NewYorkUp.com, you guys are doing phenomenal. So I just want to let you know that to start off.
Well, I appreciate the kind words, as always, Ryan. But, I just think that there's definitely something that I've noticed very, very prominently in my first year is that there's a huge disconnect between what the national narrative is that's going on in the local narrative. And I don't think that, it's centered around Josh Allen, and I don't necessarily sit here and try to sing his praises or pat him on the back or sit here and say that he had some unbelievable rookie season. Because honestly, it wasn't an outstanding rookie season. There was a lot of things to take that I think should cause fans and the organization to be hopeful for the future, but I just think that there's been so much of an anti-Josh Allen narrative out there on the national scale that I think that it's only right to kind of stand up and say, wait a second, I'm in this room every day, I'm watching every game, I'm going back and watching every game, and this is definitely not as bad as it's being painted to be in some places.
And Josh Allen's kind of had that narrative attached to him, since his college days, and one of the biggest pause moments for me that kind of shed light on the type of guy that Josh Allen is on and off the field that would fit this community. During the Senior Bowl, I see, Sam Darnold wrote down, or I see, I think it was the Combine or the Senior Bowl, one of the two, but all of the major quarterbacks were there. Mayfield, Darnold, Rosen, and they're wearing like Adidas, they're wearing Nike, they're wearing Under Armour. Josh Allen walks out wearing his brown and yellow Wyoming shorts. They're throwing the ball around, and it made me think to myself, okay, he appreciates where he came from. The fact that he didn't get the scholarship offer, the fact that he didn't get to go to Fresno State like he originally had wanted to, the fact that he went the hard route and ultimately landed on his feet in a place that I think is the perfect fit for him. And the big word that you used was hopeful. I'm hopeful for the future. I'm not ready to anoint Josh Allen as the next Jim Kelly, but a lot of things, good and bad, led me to eventually like what I saw once Allen came back from injury, especially.
Listen, I lived in Buffalo for 32 years before I went to Vegas. Grew up a Bills fan, was standing in my grandparents' living room holding hands with, 30 or so odd family members when Scott Norwood missed his kick. I've seen pretty much everything that's happened with this Bills team since about 1988. And, this is the most the most amount of potential in a quarterback that there's been in Buffalo since Jim Kelly.
Right.
No doubt about it in my mind. And, are there some concerns with the accuracy and, can he, operate in the pocket consistently over the course of a 16-game season and then beyond when you're talking about playoffs? Remains to be seen. But I think we've seen enough right now, based on the fact that he's coming from Wyoming, which is a low-level Division I program that played against low-level Division I competition, and he's going from that to the NFL. So you're talking about a guy like Kyler Murray, you're talking about a guy like Baker Mayfield. They went to Oklahoma. I mean, they're playing the best teams in the country. They were put in that position already in college to be facing the best of the best at that level.
Right.
Josh Allen got thrown to the wolves. I mean, week 2 against the Chargers, it's like, okay, you had some training camp, you had some preseason, go play the best of the best in the NFL, and good luck. And you saw some really, really significant growing pains in that first stretch before the injury. But like you said, when he came back, there was just little moments. The way that he, there's some football IQ element to it. There's also some innate, just IQ when it comes to playing sports, how you react in certain situations. And the way that he chooses to react when the pocket breaks down or when the rush is on, when to run, when to throw. Some of the throws that he made when he stepped up in the pocket, took that big hit and delivered that touchdown ball to Robert Foster. dude, that's next level stuff.
Right.
And and I thought to this moment, to this day, that throw to Robert Foster still isn't getting that's one of the best throws you'll see
I've ever
NFL
seen
all season. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Ever. And
So,
I watched I've watched Peyton Manning and Brett Favre and, you know, Tom Brady. And I mean, I don't even think any of those guys that I mentioned would, maybe Favre, but I don't think any of those guys I mentioned outside of Favre would make a throw like that where the guy is hitting him right in the mouth. I mean, he got hit a lot last season, and that was part of the reason why he was hurt, obviously.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, you know, you're hoping, if you're a Bills fan, and, you know, Tim and Kerry Pagula have put their faith in Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott. And right now, this is Brandon Beane's season. I mean, he's got a lot of work to do. You got to go out there and you have to put some offensive linemen in place that can help protect Josh Allen and, you know, give him the opportunity to grow and develop. And I think there's a couple guys out there. You know, I know you wanted to talk about some potential options, and you know, there's some guys in free agency and there's some guys in the draft, and whoever they get, this is getting to the period of time where it's no longer about development in the future. Now we're entering year 3 of this regime. The results are going to have to show. I mean, this is going to be their 3rd draft. Technically, that's the 2nd draft for Beane, but, you know, the regime's 3rd draft. And, you know, the results are going to have to be there next season. And, you know, all things are looking up, and it seems like, you know, Sean McDermott has gotten rave reviews. I've been very high on Sean McDermott. Some people have talked about, why aren't we going after an offensive coach? This is the era of offensive coaches. Well, you know, Bill Belichick, the defensive guy, still beat Sean McVay, the offensive guy, in the Super Bowl. So I don't know if that's necessarily, you know, a tried and true blueprint just of yet. I think Sean McDermott gets the most out of his players. I think the fact that he got 6 wins and they could have had more last year, even with Josh Allen missing time, tells you a lot about Sean McDermott, the coach, and what he's able to get. I mean, he had that playoff appearance was unreal with the roster that he had. So I think you have to be happy with that. But now it's about, you know, where do they go from year 2 to year 3 for Josh Allen, year 1 to year 2? Evaluate that, and, you know, this conversation can be very different at the end of next season.
I couldn't agree more. Before Matt and I delve into some of the players that Buffalo should be looking at, we're going to go to a quick commercial break. We'll be right back.